Hi all, Wonton here, and welcome to my quick rogue guide for all 3 specs in the 8.0 pre-patch. The info in this guide should be good for the start of BFA as well, but of course there's lots of class changes at the start of an expansion and I can't predict the future. Talents could be buffed, spells could be nerfed, who knows. Either way though, I won't make this a hyper-specific pre-patch guide talking about which legendaries and Antaurus trinkets to use, because that won't really matter 2 weeks from now. I want this to be general advice that should still work in BFA, but of course I'll still be releasing full guides for BFA regardless. Also, all of my weak auras have been updated for 8.0. If you're interested in what you see on screen, the link to the paste bin is in the description. Let's get started. I'll begin with the spec that's probably changed the least, which is Outlaw. Your rotation remains largely the same in Outlaw. Use Sinister Strike, which is the new name for Saber Slash. When it double strikes, you'll get a pistol shot proc for half the cost, no longer free, which will generate 2 combo points because you still take the Quick Draw talent. Then at 4 or 5 combo points, use Dispatch, which is the new name for Run Through. Since we won't have the legendary bracers soon, we don't use Between the Eyes anymore, except for when you roll the Shark buff, now called Ruthless Precision. As you can see, it now adds 60% crit chance to Between the Eyes, so when this buff is up, use it on cooldown as it'll have basically 100% crit chance. Roll the Bones continues to be used, of course. Because we don't take the loaded dice talent, you have to fish for rolls a little more, which is annoying. The current strategy is to re-roll until you get 2 buffs, a Shark buff, or a Grand Melee buff. In other words, re-roll if your result is just one of these 4 buffs. Buried Treasure, True Bearing, Broadsides, Skull and Crossbones. Yes, True Bearing, formerly the godlike buff, is relegated to re-roll territory. But if you think about it, with Marked for Death gone, a longer Adrenaline Rush cooldown, and Vanish mattering much less without the legendary shoulders, it's not too surprising that cooldown reduction has gone down in value. Looking at your talents, in tier 45 you take Vigor now. Obviously if you're doing questing or like really easy dungeons, you can still take Marked for Death as it becomes stronger the more resets you get of it. A nice surprise waiting for you in tier 100 is that you have 2 cool talents to choose from, Killing Spree and Blade Rush. At the moment, either of these talents is viable depending on your gear, but it seems like Blade Rush will be the stronger one going forward into BFA. For now, I recommend just trying both out and seeing what you like. Killing Spree gets a special mention for being hilarious in PvP, by the way. Each of its 7 strikes can proc your mastery, and it can also proc on-hit effects like Seeping Scourgewing, which means I've seen a single Killing Spree kill someone from like 60% HP. It's amazing. Anyway, in PvE, use these on cooldown on single target, and on AoE, use them on cooldown, always with Blade Flurry. Speaking of Blade Flurry, by the way, that's probably the biggest change to Outlaw. It's no longer a toggle, but a cooldown with 2 charges, and the cleave percent went from 25 to 45. Theoretically, since the uptime of Blade Flurry was about halved, but the damage was about doubled, your sustained AoE stays the same, but your burst AoE goes up, which I think is a great change as it makes the spec stronger and adds an element of skill. Some minor changes. Grappling Hook is now baseline, finally. Cloak cooldown went up a bit for all specs, and Feint cut a cooldown for all specs. Also, since we lost the Hidden Blade trait and we won't have the shoulders soon, Vanish is relatively useless now. If you do the math on Ambush, it's barely better than Sinister Strike, which means if you want to hold Vanish for utility cooldown, you're probably losing a total of like 5 DPS. Seriously. Unless something gets changed here, I'd recommend just holding Vanish because you don't really need the ambush for damage. Moving on, we have Assassination, which got some interesting changes. Your default single target setup looks like this. With Kingsbane removed, your single target rotation is probably simpler overall. Keep Corrode up, keep Rupture up, use Toxic Blade off cooldown, and use Vendetta off cooldown. Build combo points with Mutilates, or with Blindside whenever it procs, or whenever something's in execute range. Use Vanish to apply 1 or more Garrotes buffed with Subterfuge, and pray for Poison Bomb procs, although the proc rate was increased quite a bit, so it's a little less of an RNG fest compared to Legion. AoE is where it gets tricky. Assassination AoE is actually quite interesting now. First, swap out your talents to EP and Crimson Tempest. Your first priority is Garrote, since it has a shorter cooldown now, so you can effectively multi-dot with it. And not only will that give you more energy from Venomous Wounds, but if you haven't noticed, Garrote's DPS is actually about the same as Rupture, and with Subterfuge, it's actually double that. So out of Stealth, or out of Vanish, always try to apply 3 to 4 Garrotes if you can, and then try to maintain 3 throughout the fight. Your second priority is to put the Crimson Tempest Bleed up. This is a new talent that does instant damage around you and also applies a bleed to all targets, consuming combo points. And your third is to put Ruptures up on as many targets as you can. Although Rupture deals good damage, this is actually mainly done for energy regen, as Crimson Tempest doesn't give you any. Hypothetically, you could imagine with 7 targets Crimson Tempest spamming would be better than using Rupture, but if you try that, you'll find yourself running out of energy pretty quick. It's important to keep 3 Garrotes and a couple of Ruptures up on AoE to keep that energy regen going. Overall, this AoE rotation involves a lot of target swapping and dot management and is actually quite complicated, but at least it actually takes skill unlike praying for Poison Bomb did. Regardless, with Outlaw and Sub still existing, I think it's unlikely this will see much use, but hey, at least it's there. So that's the basics. If you want to get more advanced with Assassination, remember to space out your Envenoms so you don't waste Envenom uptime. Also, make sure Rupture's refreshed before Toxic Blade, and make sure that you pool combo points and energy before going into it. You want to fit at least 3 Envenoms during that Toxic Blade window. Finally, we have Subtlety, a spec that plays pretty differently to how it did at the end of Legion. If you're used to that DFA Dark Shadow playstyle where you'd burst really hard for 4 seconds during Shadow Dance and then kinda do nothing for the next 26 seconds, well, it's not really like that anymore. With DFA gone, you're better off taking Enveloping Shadows, which results in a really smooth playstyle with lots of Shadow Dance uptime. Kinda like how Sub used to play in Nighthold if you were one of the 3 hipsters that played Sub in Nighthold. The basics are still the same: Backstab for combo points, or Shadow Strike when you're in Stealth or Shadow Dance. Keep Nightblade applied, and dump the rest of your combo points into Eviscerates. Use Shadow Blades and Symbols of Death on cooldown, making sure the 40 energy from Symbols isn't wasted, of course. Use Vanish during Symbols for a free Shadow Strike. Use Marked for Death at 0 combo points, or to snipe low health targets. And if you don't want the extra button of Marked for Death, then Vigor can also be a really strong talent. Shadow Dance usage is where it gets really different. With Shadow Dance no longer providing a direct damage bonus through Dark Shadow, your goal in Shadow Dance is just to get 4 Shadow Strikes out. You always want to begin a dance at 0 to 1 combo points, and then go Shadow Strike, Finisher, Shadow Strike, Shadow Strike. That finisher can be Nightblade, Eviscerate, or the new Secret Technique talent. Secret Technique, by the way, as cool and complicated as it seems, could literally just be called Death from Above 2 or Big Eviscerate. It's just an Eviscerate that deals more damage, a little bit of AoE, and has cooldown reduction from combo points spent. Just replace Eviscerate with it when it's available, and that's it. Overall, with Enveloping Shadows, you'll find the playstyle pretty fast and smooth. You'll be cycling through a lot of dances and actually using more Shadow Strikes than Backstabs on average, which is good because of your tier 15 talent, of course, which reduces their armor after a Shadow Strike. Finally, on AoE, you can actually swap to Dark Shadow, and Backstab and Shadow Strike are both replaced with Shuriken Storm. Shuriken Combo is still a passive that exists, so your AoE consists of Nightblading a primary target, and then dumping Eviscerates and Secret Techniques into them. If you're doing a lot of AoE on 5 to 6 targets, you can also just take Deeper Stratagem. It's about the same. Well, that's it for my 8.0 Rogue Guide. This was much more of a quick and dirty video than my regular approach, but hopefully you still learned something. If you're interested in more in-depth guides for BFA, where I'll be discussing each spec in much more detail, then subscribe to the channel. This will be my 4th expansion making WoW guides, and I'm very excited to make more content. Also, I stream on Twitch sometimes, at twitch.tv/wonton_, and I'll definitely be streaming some early BFA dungeons and raids, so head over there and drop me a follow. Thanks for watching.